So 2 weeks ago, we introduced this thought of looking at God's creation. We know what seems like a majority of the world thinks of God's creation. And the question was asked, if you took God's creation and it was in a box, kind of like a crime scene, can you account for everything that happens inside the box, or does there have to be an outside influence? And that's the foundation. Last week we looked at, on the scientific side, the cosmological side of everything being created, having a creator. And we looked at how everything is fine-tuned. And for a world that doesn't believe in God as creator, scientists not believing in God as a creator, defining how everything is fine-tuned becomes difficult for them. Because the way everything's fine-tuned, as we saw, it just doesn't happen. There has to be a creator behind it. A designer. That was cosmological. Tonight we're going to look at some of the biological side. And at the same time, when we look at the biological side, can it be accounted for inside, or do we have to go outside to show that there's a creator? Let's watch this.
Talked about some of the cosmological evidence, and I'm trying to explain this evidence by staying in the room or jumping outside the room for the better explanation. Now we're going to shift toward biological evidence, because it turns out there are a couple of features of the universe that just scream for explanation, and one of the biggest one is, how does life emerge from non-life in our universe? As a matter of fact, scientific community has been conducting origin of life studies for many, many decades, and we're not getting any closer to an answer on that question. As a matter of fact, the more we drill down into the nature of biological life, the more difficult the question becomes. Now, when we do a good investigation of any crime scene, we ask the questions you probably asked when you were writing a good term paper in high school. What, how, when, where, why, who? These are questions we ask to determine what happened at the scene and who is our suspect. Well, the same kinds of questions can be used to examine the universe and the origin of life. And one of the biggest questions to ask is, what are we really talking about here? Now, you will see in your participant's guide the difficult nature of biological life. It's pretty complicated. It's pretty complex. It's not a simple problem to solve. And one of the biggest challenges in all of biology is explaining that largest molecule known to humans called DNA. So that's the what question. What we're trying to explain here is incredibly complex. Another question we might ask is where? Where do we think that life could emerge? Well, I will tell you this. When we look at all the locations that have been offered by people who are trying to determine how life originated in the universe, people have suggested it occurs in the early atmosphere of the Earth. Those actual studies have demonstrated that's a pretty tough sell, and so people have moved away from that. They said, well, maybe it occurred in the oceans or the early oceans, but people disagree about that. And maybe it occurred underneath ocean rocks or at the surface of the terrestrial crust. It's been so frustrating because each one of these locations offered doesn't work for a number of reasons. And as a matter of fact, each of these scientists will disagree with each other and say, well, my theory is better. No, my theory is better. There's no consensus on this at all. As a matter of fact, some now have said that we cannot understand how life could emerge on Earth, so perhaps it was delivered to us on an asteroid or a meteorite from outer space, which just just kind of pushes the problem off to another location, but it still begs for explanation. So on the what and the where, we still have some open questions. But when we talk about why did it emerge? What could cause this? Is it a matter of random chance? Is there some aspect of physical law, of physics, that made life emerge here? Well, to be honest, we looked at both of those. The odds are so strikingly long against the formation of life from nothing that's really not a good explanation. Sometimes, too, when people say chance, what they really mean is I have no explanation at all. So we have to kind of think about that. And in addition to that, we cannot find physical laws of, the laws of physics that could bring together the necessary ingredients for life to emerge. We'll talk about that in a minute. But then we have to ask the question, well, when did it occur? One thing we do know for sure in the entire history of the Earth, life seems to emerge in very striking fashion all at once. The range in which life emerges on planet Earth, even according to the most atheistic scientists, is strikingly short. How do we explain the sudden emergence of species, the sudden emergence of life altogether? So this is something that all of us are searching through to find a good answer. Well, I want to focus in on one thing that I thought, for me at least, was very compelling, and that is this molecule we talked about called DNA. It is the longest molecule known to humans, and it consists of 4 nucleotides that are arranged in a specific order in the molecule called DNA. This order is not just random, it's communicative. It is information. As a matter of fact, the formation of life, all of the micro machines in your cells, the formation of proteins from amino acids, all of this stuff that occurs in biology is dictated and driven by the genome, by the information, the nucleotide sequence in your DNA. Think about that for a second. If that's really information in DNA, how do we get it? Where does information come from? Stephen C. Meyer is a philosopher of science, and he made a very striking observation, which I think is pretty sound, and that is that we don't have a single example anywhere in the history of science, anywhere in the history of the universe, in which information has ever come from anything other than intelligence. Do you think physical laws can produce information? Some people would say yes. Well, that depends on what kind of information you're actually looking at. So I wanted to describe for you the 4 levels of information, or the 5 levels of information, to show you how complex DNA information is and why it screams for an intelligent mind as the source. Imagine you probably have a dog. I have a dog. I have a great dog, by the way. It's a Welsh Pembroke Corgi named Bailey. I mean, Corgis are great dogs. That's why the Queen has, 10 of these dogs? I mean, it's awesome. But I will tell you that she may not be the smartest dog in the world. If I gave her a typewriter and asked her to bang out a sentence, her first effort looks like what you're seeing here. Is that information? I mean, it's a sequence of letters that are all jumbled around. I mean, is that information? Well, in a sense, it is information. A very low level of information. It's a sequence of letters that's complex. I doubt she could type that same sentence twice. It's pretty complex, but it's not specific. There's no specificity. I see no words. This is a level of information that is called statistics by an engineer named Werner Gitt, who has done some work on the levels of information. It's the lowest level of information, just like small repeating patterns, even more complex repeating patterns. This is all information, but it's the lowest level of information. Yes, you could get this kind of information from inside the room of the natural universe with just space-time, matter, physics, and chemistry. Granted, but this is not what DNA is. Let's go another level. What if Bailey, my dog, could get on that typewriter and she could actually type out words like you're seeing now, but they're not words in any particular sentence order? I still don't know what she's trying to tell me, but hey, at least she knows this. She can code for certain words that I can then understand, recognize, and decode. This is a whole nother level of meaning, a whole other level of information. It's described as cosyntax. Now, this is level 2 information, and there's actually no way to get this level of information from inside the room of the natural universe. You need a mind that can code and understands the formation of words, even understands how these will be read by the receiver. We are now one level outside of what the natural universe can do for you, and we are still not at DNA. This is another level of information, but we're not close to DNA yet. What if Bailey could type out words and actually put them in a sentence? Grandpa is eating. You see, the sentence now has meaning. I understand what Bailey's trying to tell me. She is trying to tell me that Grandpa is eating. This is another level of information. This is called semantics. But we are still not at what DNA is. And we're now 2 levels outside the room of the natural universe in terms of what space, time, matter, physics, and chemistry can deliver. Well, what if Bailey could actually not just type out a sentence, but she can make a request with her sentence? Think about that. Oh my gosh. Well, how would she do that? Here's a sentence, for example. It's clear she wants Grandpa to feed her. Okay, this level of information in which the sender is actually making a request, well, this is a whole other level of information. We are now we're now 3 levels outside of what the room can do, and this level is called pragmatics. It's very useful, very practical. But what if Bailey's even sharper than this? She's asking Grandpa to feed her not because she wants to get fed. She's asking Grandpa to feed her because she knows that after every meal, Grandpa takes her for a walk. If the goal Bailey has is to get something that happens after the request that she knows is coming, this is called apobetics. It's the highest level of information, and it turns out 4 levels now outside what the natural universe can deliver. We are finally at the level that we see in DNA. How in the world are we going to explain this? Remember, low-level information like Bailey's first sentence you see here is no way to tell what it means. And I can even take a character out, and it makes no difference in terms of meaning. But go to the highest level of information. Do you see her sentence here? Let's eat, Grandpa. Well, if we take out the comma, the same comma we took out in the first sentence, do you see how the entire meaning of the sentence changes? This is no longer Bailey asking to be fed. This is Bailey who wants to eat Grandpa. Do you see the difference? This is how we know it's the highest level of information. Well, think about this. You and I, we have a DNA code that describes everything about us, and there are now genetic therapies in which all they try to do is change the information in the DNA because subtle changes to the nucleotide sequence produces physical changes in meaning, in structure, in how we are as humans. This tells us that DNA is at the highest level of information. Far more than statistics, we are looking at the level that has now been called apobetics. And the reason why that's so powerful is because we've got to try to explain how we've got that kind of information in our universe. Can we stay inside the universe to explain that? Now, there are a couple of ways that people have tried to explain it, and they all fail. They can't explain really how we get this level of complexity and specificity in DNA. They can't explain where this might emerge. They can't explain when this might emerge. Now, there is another explanation for DNA. If it's not going to be chance, which it isn't, and it's not going to be physical law, which they have to demonstrate to us that physics can somehow produce information, and they haven't, there's another option, and that is that it truly is information. Information that comes from a mind. Now, here's what I'm seeing. In all those questions we started with, the what, when, why, where, who questions, the one question that science refuses to ask is the who. They're willing to ask the what, when, why, how, where, no problem. But what if all the evidence we have points to a who and not a what? Are they willing to ask the who question? Well, no, they're not. Well, why not? We don't do science that way, Jim. Really? Well, why don't you ask who questions? Because there are no who's in the natural universe us to ask. It's a what. It's going to be a what. Well, wait a minute. What if all the best evidence you had points to a who? Are you willing to entertain the possibility of a who? And here we have something in the universe, information, which is best explained by a who, an intelligent mind that is the source of the information in the DNA. Once again, we have to jump outside the room of the natural universe to explain what we see in the room of the natural universe. An all-powerful, timeless, spaceless, non-material, uncaused first cause that is a fine-tuner, creating a universe that has purpose and meaning and is designed to support life. That not only that, he is communicating to us through the DNA in order to originate life in this universe. He's set the table, and now he's delivered the goods. And we are outside the room for our explanation.
How important is information? Do what? Extremely. I think we had very Information is how we find out about things. Information is how we make decisions. The problem is when we disregard information and try to make sense of everything. Ethan Carmichael was brutally stabbed to death in his workshop. He had a large electronics store, and he was brutally stabbed. Squad found his body, and careful not to step or displace any evidence. As they were looking at it, they found a cell phone. Many of them wanted to hurry up and close this case and go home. And as the last investigator got there, they were talking about this body. What happened? How did it take place? Kind of inside the room, outside of the room. They noticed a lady standing outside and asked who she was, and she was Ethan's girlfriend. She was the one that had found the body. And as she was waiting for to come talk to her, Rachel was lighting up a cigarette and smoking. But the investigator was interested in the telephone, the cell phone that was laying right there. What information could that phone give for that specific crime? And he picked up the cell phone, and on the cell phone it had this, BTI 30. Does that sound anything of significance? No, not really. But what was interesting is when they asked for Rachel's cell phone, they noticed that same thing was on her phone, BTI 30. And one of the things that Ethan and Rachel would do when they were communicating to each other, BTI 30 really meant be there in 30 minutes. Well, Ethan did not know that Rachel had another boyfriend. And as he was getting ready to lock up, he gets a text from her, be there at BTI 30. Well, guess what? He just sat there and waited. Guess who showed up? The other boyfriend who stabbed him to get him out of the picture. Rachel shows up 90 minutes later to discover a body, calls the police, thinking everything is. But that little piece of information, BTI 30. For us, it may not be a big deal, but it was that piece of information that helped solve that murder. You know, I was thinking of how we do information. So if someone says, and we do a lot of information in certain ways, especially with technology and phones. So if someone says ASAP, what's that mean? As soon as possible. I mean, that's information, isn't it? LOL. Laugh out loud. DIY. Do it yourself. ROFL. Rolling on the boy, we are smart. ETA. BOLO. BOLO. Be on the lookout. If you're NCIS fans, you hear BOLO every week. IMO. In my opinion. BBS. Be back soon. How about this one? POS. Parents over shoulder. But information Little pieces of information go a long way, don't they? And the way that God creates, and he mentioned DNA and the cell. Listen, the cell that God has created is more technologically advanced than a Boeing 747. I mean, think about this. A Boeing 747, those are the big planes. And try to imagine what it would take to build one and to get, it's one thing to build one. Another thing to get a thing up in the air flying without crashing. Think of all the intricate things that need to take place for that to happen. And yet the cell is more advanced than the airplane. God takes DNA and puts in the information that is needed for man to exist. In Genesis chapter 1, we have these, verse 11, God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plant yielding seeds, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, according to what? To its kind on the earth, and so it was. And the earth brought forth vegetation, and plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to what? Its kind. And God saw that it was good. Then we find in Genesis chapter 2 and verse 19, now out of the ground the Lord, he formed the beasts of the field and the birds of the heavens and brought them, and it was man that he gave man a job to have dominion, to give them names. And whatever Adam called them, that was their name, wasn't it? And he gave names to scriptures, all the stocks and all the birds, every beast of the field. And Adam was there, and there was no helper to be found. And what did God do? He caused a deep sleep to fall upon him. And as he slept, Scripture says he took a rib and he formed a woman and brought her to him. Information. God creating. I like what he said. We have all the why and the wheres and the whens and the hows. And everybody's fine with those. But when it comes to the who, that's the key. The who. Here's what we need to understand, folks, is there are many out there asking the who, or wanting to know, or they have some misconstrued idea of who the who is. What's our job then as believers? It's to introduce them to the who. No, we are to live in such a way that we introduce them to the who. I think one of the biggest difficulties we have as believers is we've been believers for a long time. And when you have done something for a long time, you forget what it was like before that starting point. For many of us, how many were saved as a child? We go back a long time. And for that's all we know. But yet there are many that they have no clue whatsoever, do they? They're going to have questions. All their questions range from things that all they can see. They don't know about faith. They don't know about God. And so if they have no idea about God, they don't have no idea about faith, where is their instruction coming from? It's information that is given them. So, if you're in a school, what information do you get as a young person? Evolution. Whatever's in the book. Evolution. Big Bang. He mentioned, and this thought of, things just showed up. There is nothing, let's just say the world has, to come alongside of that, to say, okay, let's weigh and see. That's our job, is to come alongside the world and say, listen, this is what the world says. This is what the world is teaching. But this is what God has done. There is a creator. Scripture says all we have to do is look around and his creation screams his name. We talked about the fine-tuning last week. Explain that. If there's an agreement that there's fine-tuning, then guess what? There has to be a who. Things just don't happen, and they're organized. Things don't happen, and then logically there's steps. There has to be a who. He brought up a whole thing about information, the DNA. I was thinking about that as I read. How many have dogs? I think Miss Susan's the only one that doesn't have a dog. I would say on some days, yes, after Stud. She's probably the smartest person in here. But what if, put your dog in that, in the different types of information. One, just tapping, all right, you can stay inside a room. It may not tell you much, but it's, what do you call it? Statistics. That's devoid of obvious gain or obvious origin or meaning. And so you have that kind of information. And I wondered if Stud was given a computer, I'm like, ooh, that would be bad. Well, I wonder what if he tapped on the button, what kind of information would show up on the screen? Would it even be that organized for television? And you probably could think of your dog and what it may look like. But then every other information moved. Did you notice that? Moved from within. Without even getting to DNA, so complex that you have to say, there's a creator. Cosmetics and semantics and pragmatics, acrobatics, screaming, there is someone behind it. the world is trying to figure that out. For us, it's easy. It's God. I mean, it's the easiest thing we could do is say, you know what, man, just open up to Genesis and you'll find it out. Miss Ida. It is. The easiest answer is this: is Satan has worked overtime. Satan is great of blinding people. How can those that Jesus walked amongst not see and acknowledge Jesus for who he is? Scripture tells us they've been blinded. They were blinded. They're still blinded today. Everything points to Jesus, doesn't it? You open up, especially the Gospels, you open up and boy, I mean, as believers, we see it, don't we? Wednesday nights, looking at the feasts of the Old Testament. It doesn't take much to see what? I mean, everything is making a beeline to Jesus. Everything points to Jesus. But sadly, as we see the Creator, Satan doesn't want the world to see a Creator. So he's going to do whatever it takes, whether it's they're blinded. I think one of the biggest hindrances that we see is that many don't know what they believe. I call it a grandpa's faith. Well, grandpa believed this, so therefore I believe. Now, my prayer is grandpa believed the truth. But if you go to any academia place in the world, whether it's college or what, and someone says, why do you believe what you believe? Well, that's what grandpa taught me. You know what's going to happen? They will be destroyed by words. And everything that was banking on will be crushed. Guess what? Then the next thing is whatever seems logical or the least amount of kickback, I will hold on to that. I will hunker down. I will hide. That's what believers face. And if we don't know what we believe and why we believe, what did Peter say? Be ready to give an answer for what? The hope that you have. Always be ready. And there is a section, as we are looking at, that has to deal with, all right, when it comes to creation, why do you believe what you believe? If you were sitting down at a table for lunch, and someone came up and just had a conversation, hey, I know something's different about you. Why do you believe what you believe? Talk. Faith. It's true. But here's why this is so important. This is what the world will say. You have faith. I don't really care about faith. We're at an impasse. You say it's true. I really don't believe it's true. We're at an impasse. if that happens? Do we say, well, all right, my hands are done. I did my duty. I told them about the truth, and I go on. Or do we what? Come alongside. And at the same time, I think we need to be able, if we know the truth, we should also be willing to ask questions, knowing that no matter what is said, it's not going to change what I believe. But guess what? It shows that you care. It's the same way with people of another faith. If showing that, all right, at least I want, I'm interested in what you believe. If you're sitting, let's just say with someone of the Mormon faith, whatever they say, is it going to change what you believe? It better not one bit. But by at least listening, you're building a relationship. You show that at least you care. And isn't that why we evangelize? Is because we care. We care for souls. And having that conversation. We want to talk about science. Okay. Well, it just happened. Okay. Can we keep it all nice and neat inside the box? Let's talk about what's inside that box. Time and space, matter, and all those things that have been mentioned. Let's have... Now, if we can't, then there has to be another source. Another reason. And as those doors open, we begin sharing the truth. And sharing your faith. I'm just curious. We've all done it. At least I hope we've all done it. How many times have you shared your faith, you told someone about Jesus, and boom, at that moment, they accept Jesus Christ as their personal Savior? Has that ever happened? One was professed, okay. And if they profess it, I mean, God knows. But that's just one. That doesn't normally happen, does it? So that means that as we share, a seed must be planted. And we see that in Scripture, don't we? And then there's this process. There is working the ground. There is watering. There is a patience. I'm getting very impatient right now, thinking here in a couple months I can try to re-garden things. And I'm still having to wait for this weather. And then once it's planted, there's still all this waiting and all this work. That's the same way. We must be willing to come alongside. We must be willing to be patient. We must know what we believe. And we must be willing to do whatever it takes for those that don't know to know who the Creator is. Because when we do break it all down, everything screams a Creator, doesn't it? When your creation declares your name, the fine-tuning, what's it do? It screams that there has to be a Creator. We know who that Creator is. We look at the intricacies and the information that is given in the human body, the DNA. How does that happen? There has to be a creator. It's my prayer that no matter where we find ourselves, no matter what the situation is, that we would be willing to listen, because people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And that we would be willing to take the time to let me tell you about who has created all of this. It's not some myth, it's not some crazy religious thing. It is truth. It's truth. One, I live by faith, but two, it can be proven. Isn't that the thing with science? If it's not God, then you're going to have to come up, it's got to be someone else. May we be the ones that work as God gives us those divine, I call them divine opportunities. So we live by faith, walk by faith, believe by faith, that we'll be able to explain and share that faith to others. Would you please stand? So we see in the creation of things a creator. We see in the informational way a creator. We'll continue next week, week 4. As we build this concept of outside of the box. And as we build this model, we want to call it a suspect of who's responsible. Here's what we have so far. It is external to the universe. He's non-spatial, atemporal, non-material. He's uncaused. Powerful enough to create everything we see in the universe. Specifically, purposeful enough to produce a universe that's fine-tuned to life. But then is intelligent and communicative. Intelligent and communicative. Intelligent to create us just the way we are, so that we can have communication with each other, but most importantly, so that we can have communication with Him. Brother Jeff, would you dismiss us in prayer, please?